Hey, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co, and today I'm reviewing Alien Frontiers Edition X from Starling Games. Alien Frontiers is a competitive dice placement game in which players are trying to slowly load up their colonies onto the planet over here in order to get as many points as possible, because every colony is going to be worth the points, but control of different regions on the board is going to be worth an additional point. And when you place down your final colony in the game, your 8th colony, I believe it's 8 colonies, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, your 8th colony in the game, when you place it down, game end is triggered, and whoever has the most points from colonies, from control, and from various cards in the game, and from various agendas in the game, that player will win the game. That's the high-level overview. Dice placement, area control, placing down your colonies, trying to get as many points, while you try to manage the puzzle of what to place and what to gather and which cards to use across the course of the game. This is Edition X. If you don't know, Alien Frontiers, I believe it's from 2010 originally. This was launched way back on Kickstarter. Then I think Game Salute took it over, did a whole bunch of Kickstarters as well with that. This game has had a long history and a bunch of expansions. Expansions, by the way, that are all included in Edition X. Edition X has factions, it has agendas, it has the Outer Belt. It has all of that incorporated into the base game, and so effectively, and you could mix and match what you want with how you play it, but effectively this is going to be a review of all of that content. I've played this game way back in the day with the original Alien Frontiers. I had it in my collection for a long time. I got the rocket dice that were these cool little 6-sided rocket dice that you would roll, and they had little rocket shapes, and they're all fun and games and all that stuff, and this game has been out of print for a while, and now's your opportunity to get your hands on it. With that said, going back to the way this actually plays, every single turn what you're going to be doing is you're going to be rolling your dice, you're going to gather your dice, more specifically your dice are going to be in various regions on the board, you're going to gather your dice, you're going to roll them, and then you'll assign them based on certain rules. We're going to ignore that for a second just so we can teach you how to play the game. Then another player is going to go ahead and take back their dice, they're going to roll their dice, and they're going to assign them. Let's go ahead and put that here and here, excellent, great. We'll put this over here and here, no problem. And the last player is going to roll their dice, and again, we're going to be doing this all the time. I just want to show you how this works because of the way the dice placement works. We'll pop these over here, no problem. We'll go ahead and put this down here, which is great, and we'll toss this to over here. Done. Okay, great. So now we have a bunch of dice on the board, and it's back to the yellow player's turn. Now that all the dice are there, the yellow player is going to recall their dice at the start of the turn. They're going to recall all the dice on the board. These ones over here, these ones over here, and then any dice that they have made from the maintenance bay over here. When you go to the shipyard, you can make additional dice. You start with 3, and you can make more, and since these are your workers and you get more done with them, well, more dice is better. You're going to recall your dice on the board, but the other player's dice all stay on the board. This is very different than many worker placement games that have rounds in it, rounds which everyone places their workers one at a time. In Alien Frontiers, you are placing your workers and they're constantly cycling in and out, which results in a constant puzzle of potentially blocking others for multiple turns in a row from doing things. And to that end, you're going to recall your dice, you're going to roll them, and then you're going to figure out where to assign them to different things. The general idea, like I said already, is this is dice placement. So to begin with, more dice is better. Placing 2 equal dice at the shipyard lets you buy more dice, spending the solar power energy plus the ore in order to buy your 4th, 5th, or 6th dice, getting progressively more expensive. When you buy a dice, it goes to the maintenance bay, and you'll pull it back along with the additional dice the next round. That's going to be the starting point over there. From there, we're going to go to the colony constructor over here. The colony constructor lets you put dice into the actual moon over here, but you do need 3 of the same kind, which is less likely when you're rolling exactly 3 dice, but becomes more and more likely as you're rolling 4, 5, and 6 dice. You place 3 equal dice here, you pay 3 ore, you take one of your colonies, and you put it down onto the board, which can help you get control of an area, or shift control, or remove control from a player as you go through that, and you adjust your score tracker over here. That's going to be how you get colonies on the board. This is a good time to talk about how you get resources, because you may have noticed that I've been spending ore and energy, and getting those resources can be very helpful, so let's talk about that. When you go to the lunar mine over here, you have to spend a die that's equal or greater than the highest dice placed here, which effectively means that the first time someone goes here, you can go ahead and drop a 2, not a problem. But then after that, you might need to drop a 3 or higher. You need to drop a 2 or higher, but you might drop a 3. And then blue, being the jerk face that he is, drops a 6 because that gets him an ore, and also makes it harder for other players to get ore. And that 6 won't be taken off the board until it goes back to blue's turn, which leaves that interesting blocking mechanism. Eventually, blue might take their 6 off, but in the meantime, yellow or red may have put a 6 on there, continuing the blocking, locking players out of there, or forcing them to put higher numbers onto the lunar mine to get ore. You'll get an ore every time you place it there, making ore the harder resource to get. The good news is you can get energy. Energy, if you place a 6 in energy, you'll get 3 energy. You get 1, 2, or 3 energy depending on the dice placed over here, and when you do that, that's going to be helpful because things need energy, but also because if you time your moves right, you can go to the orbital market. When you place a pair of dice at the orbital market, let's say these 2 2s here, you get to do as many trades as you want at the orbital markets, trading in energy for ore at that ratio. Right now, this is a 2-for-1 ratio we're going to be trading things in, and you can repeat that as many times as possible, giving you an opportunity to get all that abundant energy and trade it in for the slightly harder to get ore. We're also going to have the alien artifact cards here. We're blocking the board a bit just so we have everything on camera, but the alien artifact cards have you placing dice down, and every time you place dice, you can sweep the market putting new cards out, and once your total dice equal 8 or higher, you can take one of these cards. This is going to be a big part of the game as you gather an absolute ton of cards that can help you by giving you recurring benefits you can take every turn, or alternatively ways to discard those cards to get stronger benefits, but you lose the card. So that's a fun little way of getting and engaging in the whole card market and the abilities that will let you modify, manipulate, and adjust things and get in the way of other players as you go through the game. Speaking of getting in the way of other players, we have the Raiders Outpost. At the Raiders Outpost, you put a sequence. A 2, 3, 4 will get you what you need there. 2 plus 3 plus 4 will get you what you need, and you can steal any combination of 4 energy or ore from other players, or take a card from other players. Those cards can be victory points, by the way, so they can be very impactful, or it can be that card that they keep doing to steal your dice every turn, so you can take that back. There's a ton of cards and abilities and resources, and you go there to take things out. But the good news, or bad news, depending how you look at it, is other players have the opportunity to knock out your 2, 3, and 4 if they place a higher sequence of dice. So if they place a 3, 4, 5, they can knock you out, being able to steal from you, taking things from you instead as you go through the game. And then lastly, we have, we have 2 things left. We have 2 things left to do. First of all, one slight correction, which is more of an expansion conversation, but if you're playing with agendas, which is an optional expansion, when you go to the orbital market, you can also draw 2 agendas, although you are limited to 3 agendas. And agendas are extra ways of getting points over here, where you can either get an in-game point or an end-game point, depending on which of these you accomplish. You cannot get both, even if you achieve both. We have the terraforming station, which is a quicker way of getting a colony on the board, but at the cost of a ship. To go to the terraforming station, you must place a 6 there and pay 1 of each resource, and then put a colony on the board, but then this will go back off the board, it'll be leave the board, and it's gone. You cannot do that if it will lower your number of ships to 3 or fewer. Actually, it's not true. You cannot do it if it will lower it to 2 or fewer. You cannot do it if you have 3. You have to have 4, 5, or 6, at which point you can give up one of your ships to be able to go ahead and terraform, getting a colony on the board faster, along with its associated benefit. One thing we haven't heavily talked about is, in addition to being points, every colony on the board has a specific zone that is associated with a benefit and giving you some sort of benefit. The Bradbury Plateau over here lets you pay 1 less resource, 1 less ore, every time you use the colony constructor, and since ore is hard to get, that can be useful. The Burroughs Desert gives you a potential extra die that you have to pay into, but it gives you an extra die every turn. All of these give you different abilities that will help you with your engine, help you win the game over other players, and combined with the points factor, means players are constantly vying for control of this planet. Which brings us to the last area before we get to the Outer Belt being an expansion board that you can choose to add. But this last area over here is the colonist hub, and whenever you place any die here, you simply take one of your colonies, you put it on the first spot, and then every additional die just keeps moving along the board. It's one of those things that isn't the strongest, but it's a great place to use extra dice to be able to slowly move your colonies on. When you get to the final space, you can pay these resources to put it onto the board to grab that Bradbury Plateau, and again, move yourself up 2 points. It's a slow and steady wins the race kind of thing, but it's a great place for extra dice. Now, if you're playing with the Outer Belt, so far from the expansions, we've talked about the agendas. The agendas are going to be those extra cards. You'll deal 2 of them to every player at the beginning of the game, and then players can go ahead and draw more, and you're limited to a maximum of 3 of them. We have the Outer Belt, which is another way of getting a new card market. These cards are going to shift along every round, depending on how you roll that asteroid die, so they're slowly moving or staying in the same place, but as players place their dice to different areas, they'll be able to gather cards. You cannot use them the same round you get them, for most of them that is, but you'll be able to gather card, and then these do not refill. Rather, as you roll this dice, they slowly continue to move along the board, leaving any empty spots and putting a new one out. So it's another source of cards that have their own different way of operating, of trading things in, of giving abilities. Some of them are going to have to be discarded, some of them stay in play, like the alien tech. It's just another source of cards and abilities in the game. And then lastly, for the last expansion, we have the factions expansion. That's going to be a whole pile of these factions over here that give players their own asymmetric ability, as well as a worker placement zone where other players can go to be able to take some sort of benefit in the game. This is just a bunch of factions, a bunch of again, asymmetric abilities to modify the game state. That's the basic idea before we start getting into the nuance of what the cards or the locations do, which we're not going to do in this video. But the basic idea is you pull back your dice, you roll them, you assign them to different areas depending on certain rules, as well as depending on player count that you're playing with and the spots on the board. You take the various actions which involve gathering energy, gathering resources, eventually trading them in different ways to either get cards or to get yourself on the planet. Those are going to give you benefits from the cards, from the planet spots, from the Outer Belt cards, from your faction board, and all of these are going to combine into your attempt to get 8 of your colonies onto the planet as fast as possible, and more importantly, to end up with the most points at the end of you doing that. And that is basically Alien Frontiers and all 3 expansions mixed into the core box over here. That's Alien Frontiers Edition X. Which brings us to the review, starting off with the ease of play. The ease of play here is hard for me to gauge only because I already know this game. I've already played with all these expansions. I've read through the full rulebook to like reacclimate myself or see if anything's changed. I haven't noticed any changes. I'm not saying there aren't. There might be small changes, but from my own memory of playing the game, I have not noticed any changes at all to the gameplay. Past that, the rulebook is fairly easy to go through, but it's said with the caveat that it is a little more heavy on the text and a little lighter on the examples and illustrations, and that wasn't a problem for me because I know the system. It might be a little bit much in terms of if you haven't played the system, so I think it could be a little better as far as illustrations and examples. Again, I think it is comprehensible to a large extent. I think it's easy to comprehend, but I'm saying that with the bias of knowing how to play the game. Past that, game time generally comes in at around 90 minutes. It can vary. If you're playing with 2 players, you can easily get a 60-minute game in. If you're playing with 4 players, it might drift to 2 hours, but generally you're looking at closer to 90-minute range. I think regardless of player count, 2 to 4 players, you'll find yourself somewhere in that zone. Past that, as far as what I like, don't like, and can see others not liking, starting off with the fact that this is not just worker placement, which I like in general, but rather this is dice placement. Ooh, a 1, 2, or 3. It's going to go straight back to the Raiders Outpost. This is dice placement, a mechanic that I thoroughly enjoy. I like the idea of trying to roll dice and figure out how to use them together to figure out where you need to go. Combine that with powers and abilities from 14 different sources. You have the alien cards, you have the outer belt cards, you have the locations on the board, you have the actual worker placement zones in the game, you have your faction abilities. There's a lot of things you can do in this game that give you different things to kind of think of or focus on. You have your agendas, which will give you different puzzles as far as how to get in-game points or end-game points, and those end-game points can be a big deal. If you come across the player who is threatening the other players, well, people are going to try to take your spots away from you on the board. But if I have 3 cards that are agenda cards, even if I have the opportunity to reveal them in-game, I might choose not to hold on to them for potential endgame points, because that way you won't mess with my stuff. Because there is a lot of messing with people's stuff in this game. I mean, a 2-player game is obviously head-to-head, so it's a little different puzzle, but at 3 or 4 players, you are constantly placing things down to mess with whoever's currently winning, and so holding onto cards to the last minute could be a big deal. Going back to all those powers and abilities I mentioned, again, a lot of ways for you to mix and match different rule-breaking things in the game to give you a fun engine of not just what the core puzzle is. The core puzzle is roll dice, place dice, get resources, trade those resources in, but then how to optimize around that. Which abilities on the planet are going to work well with your cards, with your faction benefit? Which way can you most efficiently take control from other players? Which alien tech card you're going to play, and it might have cost you 2 full dice, and maybe it's worth it, maybe it's not, but you're going to go ahead and spread out a bunch of other players' planets to other areas, giving you control of multiple zones as you push things around. There's a lot of ways to break the core rules with all the extra stuff going on in the game, and that's often where a lot of the fun comes in for me. The mix of area control and worker placement combined with the powers and abilities overall give Alien Frontiers a general puzzle that just holds up even, well, 10 years later, 13 years later, I think it's 13 years later, 13 years later from the original game. This all holds up as a generally very solid worker placement game that gives you the dice placement aspect. Dice placement, the caveat that the dice being higher are almost always better, with the exception of the orbital market. Usually you want higher dice, and so that does have that slight downside. Now you could do a lot with your dice, and you can mitigate, you can match, but generally higher dice are going to be better in the game. Although I guess the outer belt also introduces a reason for lower dice to be better, so there is that caveat. But overall, this gives you a solid dice placement puzzle that is very compelling, very rewarding, and a lot of fun to experiment and play with in different ways. As far as what I don't like in the game, is you kind of need all those other elements for it to be more interesting to me. For me, the core puzzle of Alien Frontiers works, but it works while being very repetitive and samey. It's exactly what I said. You're going to want to get those shipyards every single time. You want to build up your ships, your fleets. The resource cost to pay into them is usually almost always paid back by the fact that you're getting those dice every single turn and you can use them for other things. And so the initial puzzle is getting solar, getting the lunar mine, and then trying to figure out how you can get your ships as fast as possible. That's the core starting puzzle. Now that is mixed up by different caveats, by the fact that area control on the planet can give you another ability that will also help you in the game. So if you can get that early colony, maybe it's worth the trade-off. If you can get various tech cards, that will change things up. The outer belt cards, the factions, the agendas, all those things slightly change up the core puzzle. But without those things in the mix, you kind of have a very samey pattern of roll dice, gather resources, gather more ships, and then place colonies on the planet as fast as possible. Yes, many games you can devolve to a samey kind of cycle, but I feel that sameness a drop more in Alien Frontiers, at least until you introduce all the other expansions and factions and all that stuff, which for me, when I play the game, I tend to try to focus as much as possible on all those other things, because those things to me keep the game cycle a bit more interesting as I combine the core puzzle with other elements of the game. So I guess my main and only critique really comes down to the fact that I think the core cycle ends up being a little samey. As far as what I can see others not liking, first of all, there is that thing I mentioned earlier, which is ganging up against the leader. This is a game that if you're playing a 3 or 4 player game, and if you have the most points, people are going to be viciously putting your colonies onto the central puzzle as fast as possible to take your stuff from you. They will not be messing with each other, other, they'll be messing with you, and that can be frustrating, but it's the price of being the person who has the most points, so there is that trade-off. But if you don't like games where you get ganged up on as soon as you're winning, this is not a game for you. This will happen. Or maybe you'll enjoy this game at 2 players, where that's less of a factor. Secondly, from there, there's also the fact that the cards vary drastically in how useful they are based on the situations on the board. There are so many cards that can be absolutely useless to you, but there's also cards that can be incredibly impactful. Now, it's a good thing that the alien artifact market has a way of sweeping cards as you place dice, which is important, but you can still sweep into a bunch of useless cards and now be locked into dice positions. I don't think any cards are useless. I may have, if I said useless a second ago, I apologize. There are more and less useful cards as far as how impactful they can be, from things that will prevent others from stealing to you, things that will completely mess with the main board, things that will steal dice, and things that just don't feel as cool. As far as final thoughts on Alien Frontiers, specifically Edition X, this is a game that I had a long time ago, kept it for a long time, played it for a long time, and enjoyed it for a long time, and I still enjoy it today. This incorporates all the other elements into a single box, which I think is good. I think, honestly, going back to like the price points and the this and that, I think the core box feels like a complete experience to me when you have it all. I think of the expansions more as modules. Factions is a module, Agendas is a module, and the Outer Battle is a module. All fits beautifully in the core box, and it gives you a very solid, cohesive experience. For me, I think in preference order, I probably enjoy Agendas the most because it does give you that kind of hidden boost. Outer Belt I like a lot as well, and Factions is my least favorite only because I think I find a lot of the factions to feel a little fiddly as opposed to clean and smooth. Now, I like them, don't get me wrong, and I always play with them, but often reading the rule cards they have associated with them is a bit of an exercise in okay, I get what it does. And they don't just feel as cohesive, but they work. They do a good job. I still like them. I like all the modules and expansions, and overall, the overall experience of Alien Frontiers with all of that in it, for me, is a 4 out of 5. It still holds up decently. It shows its age a drop, being a 13-year-old game in the market, but overall, this is one that still gives you a solid worker placement experience that is thoroughly enjoyable, and gives you enough modules, contents, cards, and abilities, and everything else to mix up that game state for you. As far as other game recommendations, if you're looking for other similar games, Castles of Burgundy is going to be my favorite dice placement puzzle of all time, I think. I'm pretty sure it's my favorite dice placement puzzle, giving you a way to utilize dice in a variety of factors as you roll dice, and use them for worker placement to a degree on a little bit of a shared board, a little bit of your personal board, as you build up your own castle in, I guess, Burgundy. And then secondly, if you're looking for a different way to get area control presence on the moon, then I highly recommend Mission Red Planet. Although I don't know if this is like the moon, I don't know what this is exactly. This is somewhere, it's Mars, it's called, no, it's Alien Frontiers, it's not Mars, this is, either way. Then we have Mission Red Planet. If you're looking for a different way to get area control on Mars, Mission Red Planet is going to be a game that gives you an entirely different puzzle as far as how to get that area control, along with abilities and everything else, but just not a dice placement puzzle. Rather, it's about trying to think through how to use your roll cards at the right time for the right opportunity to win that game. In any case, and until next time, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. Hope you enjoyed this video, and as always, I hope you have a good one.